They're saying the entire foundation dissolved last month, Rayan said over the phone. His voice carried the careful tone of someone delivering bad news. I was sitting at my kitchen table, coffee growing cold in front of me, when those words landed like a punch I didn't see coming. 20 years. 2 decades of monthly donations. Automatic transfers from my bank account every single month without fail. I set the mug down slowly, my fingers suddenly unable to maintain their grip on the ceramic. The coffee sloshed against the sides. "What do you mean, dissolved?" I asked, though I already understood the words perfectly. Rayan was my accountant. He wouldn't call with confusion in his voice unless something was genuinely wrong. The morning light streaming through my kitchen window seemed too bright suddenly, too harsh. I found myself squinting against it, even though I'd never had trouble with that light before. "I mean, there's an investigation, Everly. The IRS contacted me this morning. They're looking into the Lighthouse Children's Foundation. Apparently it never had legitimate 501c3 status. Not for the last decade anyway. Maybe longer." He paused. I could hear papers shuffling on his end. "The donations you made, all of them. They're not tax deductible. And worse, there's no evidence the charity actually exists." I stood up from the table. My legs moved without my conscious decision to make them move. I walked to the window and stared out at my garden, the roses I'd planted 3 years ago now blooming in their 3rd spring. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 5 minutes ago. The world hadn't shifted, the sun hadn't moved, but something inside me had cracked open. "How much money are we talking about?" I heard myself ask. The question came from somewhere distant, like I was listening to someone else's voice. "Based on your records, approximately $42,000 over the 20-year period. Monthly donations of $175. $42,000. I'd never actually done the math before. I'd just set up the automatic transfer 2 decades ago when I was 45 years old, fresh off a divorce, wanting to do something meaningful with my life. The Lighthouse Children's Foundation had seemed perfect. They helped children in foster care. They provided education, mentoring, medical care. I'd received their beautiful newsletters every quarter, photos of smiling children, stories of lives changed. I'd felt like I was part of something important. "I need to see everything," I said to Rayan. "Every transaction, every receipt, everything. I'm sending it to you now. But Everly, I need to tell you something else. I've been doing some research this morning. The foundation's website went dark 3 weeks ago. Their office address doesn't exist anymore. It's a strip mall now. There's a nail salon there. The phone number they gave donors is disconnected. I called the IRS back and they confirmed what I suspected. This wasn't a legitimate charity. It was a front." The words hung in the air between us. A front? Like something you'd see on the news, something that happened to other people, not to someone like me. I'd been careful my entire life. I'd checked their credentials. I'd read their annual reports. I'd even visited their office once, about 15 years ago, to drop off a donation in person and see their work firsthand. I remembered a small office with filing cabinets and computers, and a woman named Linaina who'd given me a tour. "I need to make some calls," I told Rayan. "I'll contact you later?" After I hung up, I sat back down at the table and opened my laptop. My hands moved across the keyboard with a strange mechanical precision, as if my body knew what to do while my mind was still catching up to what was happening. I searched for Lighthouse Children's Foundation. The official website was gone, replaced by a generic domain parking page. I searched for news articles. There were 3 from local outlets, all dated within the last week. Charity fraud investigation underway. Federal agents raid foundation office. Donors defrauded in 20-year scheme. 20 years. the same span of time I'd been donating to them. It wasn't a coincidence. They'd been running this scheme the entire time I'd been giving them money. Every single donation I'd made had gone into someone's pocket, not to help children, not to provide education or mentoring or medical care. To fraud. I clicked on the news article from the local paper. The headline was stark. Lighthouse Foundation never had legitimate nonprofit status. The article explained that the organization had been operating without proper registration for at least 12 years, possibly longer. They'd been collecting donations from hundreds of people, all under the pretense of helping foster children. The money had gone into bank accounts controlled by two people, Linaina Acosta and Steen Fuller. Both had disappeared. Both were now wanted for questioning by federal authorities. Linaina, the woman who'd given me a tour of the office. The woman who'd thanked me for my generosity and told me stories about the children they were helping. The woman whose newsletter I'd read every quarter for 15 years. She'd been stealing from me the entire time. I closed the laptop and stood up again. This time, I walked to my bedroom and sat on the edge of my bed. The same bed I'd had for 12 years. The same bedroom I'd decorated carefully over time, adding pieces that made me feel safe and comfortable. The room looked exactly the same as it always had. But I felt like a stranger in it, like someone had reached into my life and rearranged everything while I wasn't looking, and now nothing made sense anymore. My phone buzzed. An email from Rayan. I opened it and found a spreadsheet with every donation I'd ever made to the Lighthouse Children's Foundation. There were 240 transactions listed. 240 times I'd trusted them with my money. 240 times I'd felt like I was doing something good in the world. 240 times I'd been lied to. I spent the next 2 hours reading every news article I could find. The investigation had started 6 weeks ago when a former employee came forward. She'd worked as a secretary at the foundation for 3 years and had become suspicious about the lack of actual programs. She'd noticed that no children were ever brought to the office. No educational materials were being purchased. No mentors were being trained. She'd asked questions, and when she did, they'd fired her. That's when she'd gone to the authorities. The authorities had discovered that the foundation had no legitimate nonprofit status. They'd never filed the proper paperwork with the state. They'd never registered with the IRS as a 501c3 organization. They'd created fake documents to make it look like they were legitimate, but it was all fabrication. The newsletters, the impact reports, the photos of children, all of it was either stolen from legitimate charities or digitally manipulated. My phone rang. It was my daughter, Tiana. She lived 2 hours away and usually called on Sundays. It was Thursday. "Mom, I just saw something on the news," she said immediately. "About some charity being a fraud. I think it might be the one you donate to. Lighthouse something?" I told her everything. I told her about Rayan's call, about the investigation, about the $42,000, about Linaina and Steen Fuller and their disappearance. I told her about the newsletters I'd been reading, the quarterly updates about children's lives being changed, all of it fabricated. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long silence. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she finally said. "That's awful. That's really awful." "I should have been more careful," I said. "I should have checked more thoroughly. I should have—" "Mom, stop. This isn't your fault. You trusted them. They lied to you. That's on them, not on you." But it didn't feel that way. It felt like I'd been stupid, like I'd been naive and careless and deserving of what had happened to me. I'd been so eager to believe that I was helping children that I'd ignored the warning signs. There probably had been warning signs. I'd just chosen not to see them. After I hung up with Tiana, I made a list. I opened a document on my laptop and started typing. Every donation I'd made over the past 20 years, every newsletter I'd received, every story I'd read about children being helped, every moment I'd felt proud of myself for contributing to something meaningful. I listed it all out, and as I did, I realized something that made my chest feel tight. I'd talked about the foundation constantly. I'd recommended it to friends. I'd mentioned it in conversations at book club and at my yoga class. I'd told people about the work they were doing. I'd encouraged others to donate. I immediately called my friend, Norael. She'd been my closest friend for 15 years, and I knew for a fact that I'd told her about the Lighthouse Foundation at least a dozen times. She'd even mentioned once that she was thinking about making a donation. Norael, I need to tell you something, I said when she answered. And I'm really sorry about this. I explained the situation. Norael listened, and I could hear the shock in her voice growing as I talked. Oh my God, Everly, she said. I did donate to them. I made 3 donations, about $500 total. I'm so sorry, I said again. I should have been more careful. I should have checked. Everly, stop apologizing. This isn't your fault. You were lied to. We were both lied to. By professionals who knew how to manipulate people like us. But even as she said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was my fault. I'd been the one who'd recommended them. I'd been the one who'd talked about their work so enthusiastically. I'd been the one who'd encouraged people to give them money. Over the next few days, I discovered that I wasn't alone. The investigation revealed that the Lighthouse Children's Foundation had defrauded over 800 donors. Some had given small amounts, like Norael's $500. Others had given much larger sums. One woman had donated over $100,000 to the foundation over a 15-year period. Another man had left the foundation $50,000 in his will. The news coverage was extensive. Local news stations ran stories about the fraud. The state attorney general's office held a press conference. Federal agents were actively searching for Linaina and Steen Fuller, but they disappeared without a trace. Their bank accounts had been emptied. Their apartments were abandoned. It was like they'd planned this entire thing meticulously, knowing exactly when to disappear and where to go. I started receiving emails from other donors. Somehow they'd found my email address through a victim support group that had been created online. People were sharing their stories. A retired teacher who'd been donating for 12 years. A widow who'd thought she was honoring her late husband's memory by supporting the foundation. A young couple who'd been trying to do good in the world and had been taken advantage of. Everyone had the same story. Everyone had trusted. Everyone had been betrayed. I attended the first victims meeting 2 weeks after Ryan's initial call. It was held at a community center downtown, and there were about 40 people there. We sat in a circle in a room with fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly ill. A woman named Zolette stood up and introduced herself as a victim advocate from the state attorney general's office. She explained the legal process, what would happen next, whether there was any possibility of recovering the money. The answer was no. Linaina and Steen Fuller had disappeared with the money, and there was no way to trace where it had gone. We're working with the FBI, Zolette said. We have leads in 3 different states, but I need to be honest with you. The chances of recovering the funds are very low. In cases like this, most of the money is gone within weeks of the fraud being discovered. These individuals are professionals at this. They've done this before, likely in other states. A man in the back raised his hand. So, we just lose our money? That's it? There may be civil litigation options, Zolette said, but those are expensive and time-consuming. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you want to hear. I listened to the other victims share their stories. A woman named Alina had been donating to the foundation for 18 years. She'd been a nurse before she retired, and she'd wanted to use her retirement to help children. She'd given over $60,000. She was crying as she talked about it, and I found myself crying too. Not just for her, but for all of us. For the betrayal we'd all experienced. After the meeting, I drove home in silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't make any phone calls. I just drove and thought about everything that had happened. 20 years. 2 decades of my life spent trusting people who were lying to me the entire time. 2 decades of feeling like I was doing something good, something meaningful, when in reality, I was just funding someone's criminal enterprise. When I got home, I went to my office and pulled out all the newsletters from the Lighthouse Children's Foundation. I'd kept them all, filed neatly in a folder on my bookshelf. I started reading through them, looking at them with new eyes. The stories about children whose lives had been changed, the photos of smiling kids, the testimonials from teachers and social workers. All of it was fake. All of it was designed to manipulate people like me into giving money. I found myself getting angry, not just at Lynana and Steen Fuller, but at myself. I'd been so eager to believe that I was helping that I'd refused to ask hard questions. I'd seen a beautiful newsletter and a compelling mission statement, and I'd decided that was enough. I'd never actually verified that the foundation was legitimate. I'd never contacted the children in the photos to make sure they were real. I'd never followed up to see if the programs described in the newsletters actually existed. I thought about all the times I could have done more due diligence. I thought about the time I'd visited their office and seen Lynana. I'd been impressed by how professional everything looked. But I'd never asked to see actual records. I'd never asked to speak to any of the children they claimed to help. I'd just accepted what I was told and given them my money. The realization hit me hard. I'd been complicit in my own deception. Not deliberately, but through negligence. Through a willingness to believe what I wanted to believe. Through a desire to feel like I was doing good without actually putting in the work to verify that I was. I called Rayan back and asked him to help me file a claim with the state. I also asked him to look into whether there were any other charities I'd been donating to that might have similar issues. He said he'd investigate, and I hung up feeling slightly less helpless. At least I could do something. At least I could try to protect myself from being defrauded again. Over the next month, I became obsessed with understanding how the fraud had worked. I read articles about charity fraud. I watched documentaries about Ponzi schemes and investment fraud. I started to understand the psychology of it all. People like Lynana and Steen Fuller were experts at manipulation. They knew exactly what to say to make people like me feel good about giving them money. They knew how to create a sense of community and purpose. They knew how to make their fraud feel legitimate. I also started investigating my own life. I looked at all my charitable giving. I checked the status of every organization I'd been donating to. I verified their nonprofit status. I read their financial disclosures. I made phone calls to verify that their programs actually existed. It was exhausting and time-consuming, but it was necessary. I couldn't afford to be defrauded again. What I discovered was disturbing. Out of the 15 charities I'd been donating to, 3 of them had questionable practices. One had extremely high administrative costs, with only 30% of donations actually going to programs. Another had vague descriptions of their work and no clear metrics for success. The third one had inconsistencies in their financial reporting. I stopped donating to all 3 immediately. I also started warning my friends. I sent emails to everyone I knew who might be donating to charities, explaining what had happened to me and encouraging them to do their own research. Some people appreciated the warning. Others seemed annoyed, like I was being paranoid or overly cautious. But I didn't care. I'd been burned once. I wasn't going to let it happen again, and I wasn't going to let it happen to people I cared about if I could help it. 3 months after the initial discovery, the state attorney general's office held another press conference. They'd found Lenina and Steen Fuller. They'd been living in Costa Rica under assumed names, using bank accounts that had been set up through shell corporations. The money had been transferred through a series of offshore accounts, making it nearly impossible to trace. Federal agents had arrested them both, and they were being extradited back to the United States to face charges. I watched the press conference on the news. Lenina and Steen Fuller looked different than I remembered. Thinner. Harder. Less like the friendly non-profit workers I'd met, and more like the criminals they actually were. I felt a strange mix of emotions watching them being led out of a courthouse in handcuffs. There was satisfaction that they'd been caught. There was anger at what they'd done. But there was also something else. There was a recognition that no amount of punishment would give me back the 20 years I'd spent trusting them. No amount of justice would undo the betrayal I felt. The case went to trial 6 months later. I attended the trial on the first day. I sat in the courtroom and listened as the prosecutor outlined the evidence against Lenina and Steen Fuller. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showed the money flowing from donor accounts into personal accounts controlled by the two defendants. Email records showed them discussing the fraud, planning how to expand it, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate people. There were fake documents they'd created to make the foundation appear legitimate. There were stolen photos of real children from legitimate charities that they'd used in their newsletters. I watched Lenina as the evidence was presented. She sat at the defense table with her lawyer, her face expressionless. I tried to see some sign of remorse, some indication that she understood the harm she'd caused. But there was nothing. She looked bored, like this was an inconvenience, like the people she'd defrauded were just obstacles to be dealt with. When it came time for victim impact statements, I signed up. I wasn't sure I wanted to do it, but Zolette encouraged me, saying that it might help with the sentencing. On the day I was supposed to speak, I showed up early and sat in the courtroom, waiting for my turn. I listened to other victims speak about how the fraud had affected them. A man in his 70s talked about how he'd planned to leave his entire estate to the foundation in his will, and now he'd had to revise his plans. A woman talked about how the fraud had caused her to lose trust in all charitable organizations, and now she didn't know where to donate her money. A young couple talked about how they'd been trying to do good in the world and had been taken advantage of for their idealism. When it was my turn, I stood up and walked to the front of the courtroom. I looked at Lenina and Steen Fuller sitting at the defense table. I took a deep breath and started talking. 20 years, I said. For 20 years, I trusted you with my money. Every month, I gave you $175. I did this because I believed in your mission. I believed that you were helping children. I believed that I was making a difference in the world. I was wrong. I paused. I could feel my heart beating in my chest, feel the adrenaline running through my system. I'd never spoken in court before. I'd never confronted someone who'd wronged me so directly. What you did wasn't just theft, I continued. It was a violation of trust. It was a betrayal of the idealism that makes people like me want to help others. You took something from me that's worth more than the money. You took my belief that I could do good in the world. You made me question my own judgment. You made me doubt myself. I looked at Lenina. She was staring at the table, not looking at me. But I'm here today to tell you that you didn't win, I said. Yes, you stole $42,000 from me. Yes, you lied to me for 20 years. Yes, You manipulated me and hundreds of other people, but you didn't destroy me. I'm still here. I'm still going to help people. I'm just going to be smarter about it. I'm just going to do my research. I'm just going to verify that the organizations I'm giving my money to are legitimate, and I hope that other people who've been defrauded will do the same. I hope that you'll face the consequences of your actions, and I hope that you'll understand the harm you've caused. I stepped back and returned to my seat. My legs felt shaky. My hands were cold, but I felt something else too. I felt like I'd taken back some of my power. I'd been a victim of their fraud, but I didn't have to stay a victim. I could learn from this. I could grow from this. I could use this experience to help others avoid the same trap. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The evidence was so overwhelming that the defense didn't even mount much of a case. Linaina and Steen Fuller were convicted on all counts. They were sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. It wasn't as much time as I would have wanted them to serve, but it was something. It was justice, or at least a version of it. After the trial ended, I felt a strange sense of closure. Not complete closure. I still felt the sting of the betrayal. I still felt angry when I thought about how I'd been manipulated, but there was a sense of finality to it. The people who'd wronged me were now in prison. The investigation was over. The case was closed. But my own investigation was far from over. I became determined to understand how to avoid being defrauded again. I took an online course in nonprofit accounting. I learned how to read 990 forms, the financial disclosures that nonprofits are required to file with the IRS. I learned how to identify red flags in charity operations. I learned how to verify that an organization is actually a legitimate nonprofit before donating to them. I also started volunteering with a nonprofit that helped seniors avoid financial fraud. I used my experience with the Lighthouse Foundation to help educate other people about the dangers of charity fraud. I gave talks at senior centers and community organizations. I helped people research charities before they donated. I answered questions about how to verify nonprofit status and how to identify potential scams. One day, about a year after the trial ended, I received an email from a woman named Kaylin. She'd attended one of my talks at a community center, and she wanted to thank me for the information I'd provided. She said that she'd been about to donate to a charity that had seemed legitimate, but after listening to my talk and doing the research I'd recommended, she'd discovered that the charity had no legitimate nonprofit status. She'd saved herself from being defrauded. Reading that email, I felt something shift inside me. All the pain and anger and betrayal from the Lighthouse Foundation fraud suddenly felt like it had been transformed into something useful. I'd been defrauded, yes, but I'd also learned something valuable, and now I could use that knowledge to help other people. I could prevent them from experiencing the same betrayal that I'd experienced. I continued volunteering with the nonprofit. I continued giving talks. I continued researching charities and helping people make informed decisions about their charitable giving. Over the next 2 years, I helped dozens of people avoid potential fraud. I helped them identify red flags. I helped them verify nonprofit status. I helped them understand how charity fraud worked and how to protect themselves. But I also continued to donate to charities. I didn't let the fraud destroy my desire to help others. I just became much more careful about it. I only donated to charities that I'd thoroughly researched. I only donated to organizations that had clear missions, transparent financial reporting, and evidence that their programs actually existed and were effective. I donated smaller amounts, spread across more organizations, so that if one turned out to be fraudulent, I wouldn't lose as much money. 2 years after the trial, I received another email. This one was from the State Attorney General's office. They'd recovered some of the money that Linaina and Steen Fuller had stolen. It wasn't all of it. It wasn't even most of it, but it was about 30% of the total amount defrauded. The money was being distributed to the victims. I would receive approximately $12,000. When I got the check, I didn't feel the relief I'd expected to feel. $12,000 was better than nothing, but it didn't undo the betrayal. It didn't restore my faith in charitable organizations. It didn't give me back the 20 years I'd spent trusting people who were lying to me. But I did something with the money that felt meaningful. I donated it to a legitimate nonprofit that helped foster children. I did extensive research first. I verified their nonprofit status. I read their financial reports. I contacted their staff and asked about their programs. I made sure that the organization was legitimate and effective. And then I donated the money that I'd recovered from the fraud to help the very people that Lynena and Steen Fuller had claimed to be helping. It felt like a small act of redemption. It felt like I was taking the money that had been stolen from me and using it to actually help children, instead of allowing it to fund someone's criminal enterprise. It felt like I was reclaiming my power in some small way. Today, 5 years after discovering that the Lighthouse Children's Foundation didn't exist, I'm in a different place. The anger and betrayal have faded somewhat. They haven't disappeared entirely. I still feel a twinge of resentment when I think about Lynena and Steen Fuller. I still feel foolish for having trusted them for so long. But I've learned to live with those feelings. I've learned to acknowledge them without letting them define me. I still volunteer with the nonprofit that helps seniors avoid financial fraud. I still give talks about charity fraud and how to protect yourself. I still research every charity I donate to before giving them money. I've become more cautious, yes, but I haven't become cynical. I still believe in the importance of charitable giving. I still believe that it's possible to make a difference in the world. I just know now that I need to be smart about it. I've also reconnected with the people I'd recommended the Lighthouse Foundation to. Norael and I are still close friends, and we've talked many times about the fraud. We've both become more careful about where we donate our money. We've both become advocates for charity transparency. In a strange way, the fraud has brought us closer together. We've bonded over our shared experience of betrayal and our determination not to let it happen again. My daughter Tiana has also been affected by my experience. She's become much more careful about her own charitable giving. She's asked me to help her research the charities she wants to donate to. She's told me that she's grateful for the lessons I've learned, even though she's sorry that I had to learn them the hard way. The Lighthouse Children's Foundation fraud investigation is now closed. Lynena and Steen Fuller are serving their sentences in federal prison. The money they stole is mostly gone, distributed to their offshore accounts and spent on their lifestyle. Most of the victims, myself included, have accepted that we'll never recover the full amount we lost. But we've all learned something valuable. We've learned to be more careful. We've learned to ask hard questions. We've learned to verify before we trust. And I've learned something else too. I've learned that betrayal, while painful, can also be transformative. My experience with the Lighthouse Foundation fraud has changed how I see the world. It's made me more cautious, yes, but it's also made me more determined to help others avoid the same trap. It's made me more aware of the importance of transparency and accountability in nonprofit organizations. It's made me more grateful for the legitimate charities that are doing real work in the world. I still donate to charities. I still believe in the importance of giving back. But I do it differently now. I do it more carefully. I do it with my eyes open. And I do it knowing that I'm making a real difference, not funding someone's fraud. If you've been defrauded by a charity or any other organization, I want you to know that you're not alone. There are resources available to help you. There are organizations dedicated to preventing fraud and helping victims recover. Don't let the betrayal destroy your desire to help others. Just be smarter about it. Do your research. Ask hard questions. Verify before you trust. And remember that while the fraud was real, so is your ability to learn from it and move forward.